So, are you the type of person who thinks that you need to always be running hard to get faster? If so, I totally understand. This is how I was for a very long time, and it got me somewhat far until it didn't. And it really hurt my progress as a runner. And I didn't understand that that's why it was happening and why I was really struggling to find consistency in my running. And so that's kind of where this leads us of talking about zone two today, because if you've heard other videos of mine, you know that I shout from the rooftops of how important easy running is if you want to become a faster runner. So in this video, I'm going to break down what zone two is, why it is the key to becoming a faster runner, how to find your zone two, what tools to track it, and that big question, is it for you? So first things first, what is zone two? So zone two is basically a certain band of percentage within your max heart rate, and it's measured typically as 60 to 70%. I'm okay with bumping this up to 75%. It gives a little bit more wiggle room, and it's still a really great place to be, but in technical terms, it is supposed to be 60 to 70% of your max. So think of zone two training as building your aerobic engine. So by doing this type of training and staying in this zone, you're going to be able to run more miles, recover faster, and become more efficient at burning fat for fuel. And that leads us into, why does zone two matter? If you've watched enough of my videos, then you know that I recommend that you're spending about 75 to 90% of your training mileage in zone two, or making those easy miles. So whether you're basing that off of effort or heart rate, the majority of your running should be easy paced. In fact, learning to slow down was the number one thing that I needed to learn as a runner to finally have a breakthrough, because it allowed me to get in the volume that I needed to get to the point where I was having that aerobic endurance built up high enough that I'm actually getting faster in my races as well. The reality is before that, I never was able to have enough consistency in my running because I was running fast all the time. I never ran back-to-back days. I would get overly fatigued. I was really tired. I would get injured. And so because of all of those setbacks, I just never was able to build up the consistent volume that I needed to get to the level of training and racing that I wanted to be at. So initially I started doing this by effort, which made a ton of difference. But when I started doing this by heart rate and trying to stay in zone two by monitoring my heart rate, I saw even more gains after that. In fact, basically my entire year of training last year was very focused on making sure my easy runs were all staying in that zone two band. And that's when I got my fastest marathon times last year at the Houston Marathon, and what is now my PR of 3:29 at the Boston Marathon at the age of 43. So what you need to think of this as is that hard runs are a recipe for injury and burnout. And by making sure you are in zone two, you are avoiding overtraining that can lead to those injuries and burnout that you want to avoid. Okay, so here's the important part. And now that you know that zone two running is really important and that's where you should be spending the majority of the time, you need to know how to find your zone two. And I think most people are not taking the necessary time to figure this information out correctly. I think it is a huge opportunity. And the reason for that mostly is because I think the tools that people are using are not the best tools, which we'll talk in a minute. And I also think that people don't know what their max heart rate is. And so they really can't have accurate information at all from that. So what we think of as the basic way to find maximum heart rate is taking 220 minus your age. So if you're 40 years old, that would mean that your max heart rate is 180. So if we're talking about 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, for that 40-year-old, you are then taking 60 to 70% of 180, and that ends up being your zone two that you want to stay in, or maybe a little bit more than that if you bump it up to 75%. The problem with this formula is really not that accurate for many people. And then they just end up having these numbers that they really don't know if that's accurate or not. So there is a more accurate formula that I would recommend that you try. I think this is especially better for people as you get older. And that's what the Hunt study has come out with. So this formula offers a slightly better estimation. And in order to find this number, you take 211 minus 0.64 times your age. And that's going to give you a slightly better number than just the 220 minus your age. But it's still flawed. And so really the most accurate way to get your max heart rate is to do a max heart rate test. So you can pay money and get this done in a lab. So if you're someone who really wants accuracy, I would recommend that you go this route. But you can also do a max heart rate test on your own with a good tool, and it's going to give you pretty darn close to what your max heart rate is. And we're really not looking for perfection here with Zone 2 training anyway. In fact, I caution people to get too hung up on perfect numbers. But if you can do this max heart rate test and you have the right tool, then you're going to get pretty darn close to the numbers that you need to be focusing on. So I just got finished doing a max heart rate test. So I used this Garmin Forerunner 55, so I want to see how it matches with my heart rate strap, which was connected to my Fenix. So what was showing on the Fenix was actually the heart rate monitor. So basically what I did was, I think I warmed up for like 17 or 18 minutes. Then you're supposed to do 1 mile at tempo pace. And then you're supposed to do continuous quarter mile where you just start building the pace little by little. I got pretty fast at that point. And then the last quarter mile is just supposed to be all out. I went just a little bit past that. I was seeing mine like fluctuating. And the highest that I saw from the heart rate monitor was 184. I was watching lap pace on this one, so I'll have to check back on that one. Anyway, it was definitely hard and psychologically a lot harder than I think like doing a 5K race. So I'll definitely be interested to find out this summer when I race how it compares. Okay, so what is that best tool? Now, most people are using their GPS watches that have heart rate tracking, and they have gotten a lot better. Most of you guys are probably using a Garmin or an Apple Watch, and depending on which model or year, some do better than others. However, we really can't trust wrist-based heart rate. I've worked with enough athletes now, I look at their graphs every single day, and I just know that there's way too much nuance going on day to day with heart rate that it doesn't make sense to be using wrist-based device if you want to be tracking your heart rate. So what you need to use is a chest strap. They actually have a new one from Garmin just for women. So if you're thinking that it's going to be really uncomfortable, that might be a way to go. I will place the links to the ones that I recommend below. I think mine's great. It gets taking a little bit used to the one I have from Polar, but yeah, if you want to be training by heart rate, you really have to have a tool that's going to give you accurate information. So are there any downsides to Zone 2 training? So the answer is not really. I mean, if you are really spending that kind of 75 to 90% of your time in Zone 2 and making sure that you have a little bit of that intensity involved in your training as well, then you're going to be building a lot of gains. Now, of course, there's some nuance here, and everybody's a unique individual at very different levels, and so it's not going to be the same for everyone. But if you are implementing a lot of easy running into your training, that's really a best practice for being the best runner that you can be. It also really keeps you honest. I hear a lot of people say, well, it's fine, I can just run by feel. But the reality is a lot of us are saying that we're in the easy paced zone, that we're running by feel, it feels fine, or I can talk, when they're really not in the easy zone at all. In fact, Matt Fitzgerald talks about it in his books, 80-20 Running and Run Like a Pro. He calls this habitual pace. And we just sort of get in this pace that we are used to running all the time, that we've sort of deemed as our easy pace when it's really not. And so I just love that, going by Zone 2 training just really keeps you honest when maybe the weather is warmer, if you're running a lot of hills, or if you're more fatigued, is that, if you're staying in that Zone 2, then it's right where you need to be for that day. The one major downfall that I see is for people who are newer runners, that if they are really trying to build up a running habit and they're very focused on staying in Zone 2, it's not going to work very well and it's going to get incredibly frustrating. And that's because when you're a newer runner, if you do any running at all, it's going to spike your heart rate really, really quickly. So if you are in this category, I highly recommend that you just go by feel and effort first. Build that running routine, get kind of that solid base of running first, and then you can start doing the Zone 2 training that's going to be so valuable for you. So here's the reality check, guys. Doing zone 2 training for the very first time is probably going to feel ridiculously slow for a while. It can be very humbling, and honestly, if it feels humbling, you're probably doing it right. It takes time to transition to, but I really believe that if you give this the proper go, that you will find that it helps your training immensely, that you see the gains in your running that you've never been able to see before, that you're running faster than ever before as well, because you're getting the volume and time on feet that you were never able to previously when you were running too hard all the time. It's really all about finding that pace that feels like you can stay at and run forever. So I just like zone 2 in particular as a big part of easy running, but I also don't think it's the only thing that you should be utilizing. I very much believe that a combination of using heart rate to find that zone 2, also effort-based training, and also using pace sometimes is the best way to train to your maximum capability and become the best runner that you can be. So if you aren't sure about how to use these in combination, pace, heart rate, and effort, I definitely recommend that you check out the next video right here.